I believe that we stand on the verge of a historic moment.
You ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
I found pardon for my past, power for the present, bright prospect for the future.
If you talk to the average teenager of today, I know what it does to you.
That could have an unparalleled and unprecedented impact.
I've got a story to tell. Have you?
We just wanted to kick off season 2. John, we've already finished the season. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. We didn't even tell you it was season 1 was coming to an end.
Yeah, we just did it. But that's kind of cool, right? Because now you're just confused. But either way, we're excited to kick off our second season. But in doing that, it's a new season for us at Shaping Student Ministry in a really cool way. And so we thought it was the perfect time. I'm not going to timestamp this and tell you when we're doing it. I'm just going to say it's a new time. But one of the cool things, the reason we've got Dave on here is because we have become partners officially with an incredible organization called Christian Endeavor. And Christian Endeavor is at the moment in over 55 countries. They are doing student ministry internationally. Even the flex that our friend Joshua Good, who's been on the podcast, told me, you started student ministry in the United States 140 years ago. So it's hard to really match that. But Dave, I am so thankful you're here. You're also the author of some books we love, which is Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees, which we'll talk more about that. And the Beekeeper's Devotional, which is 15 devotions that just came out. And how about that for a plug? But we're really excited to be able to dive on and talk with you. We don't partner with a lot of people because we don't think a lot of people are really great to partner with. And I will tell you, we are profoundly thankful for the work you do and blown away by it.
Yeah. Before I do, just so thankful to be partnering with you guys as well. And just a shout out to all the people out there that are connected to Shaping Student Ministries. I just have loved from the first contact that I had with you guys, just the kingdom attitude. And I pray that all of us can grab a hold of that and just really help it penetrate and be our DNA. I mean, our definition of discipleship should have collaborative efforts as part of it. If we were to define discipleship today, most of us have some really important components that would miss. And one of those is that collaboration. It has to be what we do. The Lord just directed us in that. And so I'm so thankful to be working with you all. In terms of Christian Endeavor, you were spot on. More than 144 years ago, when this 25-year-old pastor, fresh out of seminary, sees dozens of young people come to Christ. And get this, it wasn't through some wacky, huge, cutting-edge event. It was from a week of prayer services. And dozens of young people were just impacted by the Holy Spirit. They came to Christ, and this young pastor gets up to preach on Sunday morning, and he sees all these young people, and his heart broke. Now, most of us think, well, why would his heart break? He saw all these young people in church, but his heart broke because he realized they had no plan to help these young people, and this was teenagers and young adults, but to help them get to know each other better or to be useful in their service for Christ and the church. To this day, 144 years later, that is still the rally cry of Christian Endeavor. I mean, you can go to rallies in different countries and all this kind of stuff, and they'll be doing these chants in whatever their language is for Christ and the church. And so that's where that comes from. But this guy, Francis Clark, yeah.
That's pretty prophetic.
Yeah, and if you read some of his, because he wrote quite a bit, and you can read some of his stuff from the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's amazing how far ahead of the game this guy was. His name was Francis Clark, and he actually took his Bible and he went into a closet, closed the door, and his prayer was, God, would you give me something? Now, how many of us as youth pastors have had moments where we've just been like, God, would you give me something? And this guy, he actually went in the closet and did this, and he came out. I mean, he emerged from that closet with 4 distinct dimensions of youth ministry. That they were called principles for years. We call them dimensions of youth ministry today. But it's basically a foundation that we help young people understand and then live out today. And it's amazing because it's biblical. It's just as relevant today as it was 144 years ago. The thing that really makes it executed in a relevant way is that Christian Endeavor allows young people, teenagers and young adults in different parts of the world, take a hold of this process and actually be the ones that carry it out. And they carry it out in the local church. They carry it out in their homes. They carry it out wherever it is that the Lord plants them, because even beyond the church, they're missionaries wherever it is God puts them, if they have been equipped to be so or have had their eyes opened that this is an opportunity for them. And so, in essence, that's what Christian Endeavor is. And for me in my role, I'm working with just an amazing team. Our staff team is not very large, but then we have an extensive volunteer network that goes to the 6 continents that are inhabited. So, I mean, there's just so many people involved, and most of them are doing it for no pay whatsoever, which just blows you away. I mean, I have 6 servants of God that are vice presidents that are overseeing huge amounts of work, and none of these folks are paid to do these jobs. They do it because they love it.
Yeah.
Golly.
Yeah. Well, and I think because they understand why they're doing it, so many people, and we talk about with guys all the time. We talk about it almost every week. It seems like on the cohort, every month in the cohorts, every week on the podcast. So many people know what you do. Some people know how you do it, but very few people know why. And when the people can understand the why, that's when people latch a hold of it. And I think that's such a thing for us when like in our student ministry, when we talk about the idea, what you lay out in your book, from moving students to be less like hippos and more like honeybees, to drive them from being consumers to contributors. Kind of the rallying cry for my student ministry is we want to see students do something they love for the glory of God, somewhere strategic for the mission of God. And we want to equip them to do that somewhere at their school, in the city, in the country, and in the world. And so we're trying to move students from being consumers to contributors in those ways. And, as people get to know your book, and really what we want to talk to you about today is something that I know that it's Ian's heart, it's your heart, it's my heart, because so many people, when they're thinking of, well, how do we move students or people from consumers to contributors? A lot of people will think, well, we just need to buy the right curriculum. And if we'll just buy the right curriculum, then we can really do that. And so one of the things that we talked about was we need to be discipling people, not curriculating them. Like you don't you had a curriculum, I don't even know, but like in your book, you use this powerful image of hippos versus honeybees.
Sure, I'd love to.
Could you break that down
real
quick for us?
First of all,
and then what would you
hippos
say
use 6 hours of their day to come out of the water and eat. The other 18 hours they're in the water, all right? But they come out of the water for 6 hours every night, and they consume. They consume for 6 straight hours. So if you can imagine what it is that happens at your church when you have a massive pizza party and you see the young people descend like locusts. I mean, the locusts, they come and they just consume everything on the table. But imagine that happening for 6 straight hours. So a hippopotamus can eat up to 110 pounds. They average about 80 pounds, but up to 110 pounds every day of vegetation. So that's like, it's like consuming many of your junior hires. I mean, this is a huge, huge amount of food, and they are just taking this in every single day. And so the concept here between that and their mouth on hinges and opens to like 150 degrees, right? All right. So you just get the picture of these gigantic mouths that are just chomping and chomping and eating stuff. And so they're consumers, and they eat and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And most youth ministries, and this is not just in the United States, though we've exported our concepts of youth ministry, and so it's caught on in a lot of other places in the world, unfortunately, but we've exported this idea that we only need to create an incredible program that is going to attract young people to come and sit in seats. And what's happened that's probably just as disturbing is that most of the boards that oversee ministry in our local churches, their definition of success is whether or not we have a certain amount of those seats filled or not. And in fact, their number one barometer for success is probably, I think that's even more than you had last year. The annual retreat, you have even more. You're doing a great job down there. And it's like, oftentimes our boards at churches with huge hearts, understand, I'm not chucking stones at all these people because they dedicate their time, and I've met a lot of great people serving on a lot of different boards, but they would never run their families this way. They would never run a business this way. They would never run other things that they're involved with this. They just, good. The young people are taken care of. They're filling the seats, so everything must be okay. And along with that, give them one or two. I call this the fallacy of running to extremes. All you have to do is be loaded with one or two stories of impact. Any person from your church. Now here, some of you are young youth workers out here. I'm basically telling you how you can snowball anybody into thinking that you're doing a good job, which is not the goal of this. All right. But I'm telling you that this is how shallow people think about youth ministry. Yeah. If you're armed with one or two powerful stories of impact, and somebody comes up and says, how's the youth ministry doing? And you unload that powerful story of one student being impacted, they will walk away saying, everything's great with the youth ministry. And they won't know anything.
It's
well, that's a convicting. Well, it's a convicting image because you just laid out, I think, 80% of student ministry, and 80% of just church ministry in general. Like that, maybe a sneakier way of saying it is, man, just tell the story. But you're right. I mean, we should be telling a good story, but it's absolutely, for all of us as church leaders, people substitute what you're saying, a good story, for discernment. And it's like, really it's a matter of what you value. It makes me laugh because you could do an event called free beer at your church and have 500 kids, but you wouldn't do that. But you'd still, I think you could probably do that at probably a lot of these churches, and they'd go, it's okay, whatever we call it. We had 500 people. But it's a convicting image because there's this idea of being almost spiritually gluttonous.
Yeah.
That we come, we set, we consume, but like the whole, and I mean, we do that in our lives physically. That's the struggle, right? Is to just consume to consume. But the idea of consuming is that we would have energy to go do.
Yeah.
And I see so much of what you're saying, because it's funny. I told John that I thought the story was applicable, but the movie A Wonderful Life, I don't know if you love it or not. You may not like A Wonderful Life. It's a classic. You can't like it without people hating you.
I've never actually watched it.
Well, John's fired. But it goes down as a Christmas classic. But what's funny is it was a box office failure, and Jimmy Stewart regretted ever doing it, and they wouldn't talk about it. And so it just got swept under the rug and it was done. But when they started keeping TV on 24 hours, they needed something cheap to fill the airwaves. And so when it got around to Christmas season, it was free to use It's a Wonderful Life because it was so terrible. And so they just played it over and over and over again for years and years and years. And when you talk about this hippo idea, and I think we're going to get even the idea of, well, if I just get the right curriculum or I do the right events, I think that story really probably teaches 5 or 6 things. But one thing it really teaches me is that even a bad idea can become beloved if we just shove it down our throats and don't think through it. And I think that's a brilliant thing. What would you say?
My response
to someone
is
who
that's
who
one
thinks,
way.
Well, if I just keep
that's
the stories,
one way
if I just
to
get
do
people in here, or if we just find the right curriculum, that should be enough. What would your response to that be?
God gives us a lot of creativity, and some of that leads us to ideas that are just really not all that solid. But hey, that's one way that they could do it. And I'd just say, hey, I think there's some other things that you can do with the investment of your heart and your time that can make a greater impact for eternity. And that's what it's about.
Well, absolutely. How should we view curriculum? Like because I think curriculum's like a really good tool. Like you don't want a bad tool to do work with, but it's almost like we take the tool and we make the tool the project, right? How do we need to view those things together?
Well, and to that point, like I think people kind of confuse the Great Commission with go and teach curriculum instead of go and make disciples, because it's just the thing that we've always done, and people kind of view that as the framework for their ministry. So if you hear people, like I hear student pastors all the time, and on all of these youth pastor Facebook pages, the number one question is like, hey, what are you guys using right now in your student ministry? And you can kind of, I mean, there's certain ones out there that I would say probably, I don't know what you think, Ian, probably 70, 80, maybe 90% of student ministries are all going through the same things.
Yeah.
And they're
not good. They're doing it because it's what they've always done.
Right. It's what they've always done, but it's almost like you're just mailing it in instead of doing the hard work of asking, like, well, where do my people need to grow?
Yeah. That's so much of the heart, though. And I think to Dave's point, that's maybe call it a beekeeper, but like to be a shepherd or to be a beekeeper, like it is. So we do write curriculum that is important, but the reason that we write it is so that it empowers the mission we're talking about, and we help guys learn how to develop their own stuff. That's part of why we partner in what we're doing. But to that point, John, you hit something that's incredibly important, because I don't think a lot of pastors over the last 3 generations of pastoring have really been taught well how to shepherd. I think they've been taught how to manage. I think they've been taught how to event plan. But sometimes when we talk about this idea that this idea of like, hey, where do your people need to grow? Hey, where do your leaders need to grow? The question is always, I don't really know. I've never
to answer your initial question
and
there
I think
on
get to a better place.
What good is curriculum?
How do we create a discipleship culture?
First of all, curriculum, it provides a blueprint in terms of where you're going, and that's in terms of your teaching, and that does 2 things that are very important. One, it takes away a huge amount of stress on people that are doing youth ministry, because it doesn't matter whether you are a paid youth worker or whether you are a volunteer youth worker. There are not enough hours to do what it is that you've been tasked to do. And that doesn't matter whether your youth ministry is this handful of youth that there's 5 or 6 of them, and it doesn't matter if it's like you happen to be on here and you're shepherding like 200 or 500 or whatever. There aren't enough hours to do what it is that you have to do. So having a curricular plan that avoids you going into your office or sitting on your couch and going, okay, it's time to come up with the message or the direction for the next time that we have youth group, and you'll actually have a plan. And so it is a huge stress reliever. Curriculum does do that. That's important. The second thing that it does is it helps you stay tethered to the Word as long as you've picked a good curriculum. If you're just making up your own plan kind of as you're going, that can allow you to make sure that you're fresh and on top of the major needs that your students have, that they're expressing or that you see. But there's also times that we are nourished by things that we would never say are the things we want to learn or that we're ready to talk about or whatever. So there's a curriculum is generally going to bring us through a mix of that. Can be a healthy thing. One added idea is that if a parent or caregiver comes to you as a youth worker and says, so what are you teaching down there, or what are you guys going through? You have something to show them. And so that can be really, really helpful as you're trying to build credibility, especially if you're new at a church or you're a younger youth worker and you've got these parents going, oh man, this person doesn't even have kids of their own. How are they going to understand my kids? And I mean, and they go through this whole thing. So all of those things are great, but they do not provide a foundation for your student ministry. They do not provide a plan for how it is that you're going to help young people commit to Christ 24/7. They don't even come close to that, but there is value in it because of those other reasons that I mentioned.
Right.
Yeah. Well, before we end this half of the podcast, I would really love for you to kind of finish it out explaining to people. We talked about this idea of hippos and students being consumers. One of the things that I love, and I've said this to you almost every time we've spoken, one of the things I love about the framework and really the vision manifesto of hippos and honeybees is that it has a global vision. It's not condensed to or segmented off to the Northeast or the Southeast or the Midwest or the United States. I mean, it is very clearly after the heart of a generation all over the world. And to your point, it's really earlier point, it's not that disconnected from Francis Clark and the stuff that we've read that he wrote in the late 1800s and early 1900s is after the heart of the generation. But this idea of students as consumers and the danger of having consumeristic students, one of the things that as I kind of hand it over to you for the honeybee section, is one of the things that I look for that it has challenged me to do is to take this generation who is prolific content creators and content consumers and unleash them in the church.
So
doing those things that
the average honeybee hive could have as many as 50 to 60,000 bees
compared to what we've talked about earlier.
And for them to make a pound of honey, there is not one bee that is going to bring back more than 1/10 of a teaspoon of honey. So now you picture a pound and you picture 1/10 of a teaspoon, like this itty bitty tiny bit. They actually go out and they pollinate somewhere between 2 to 4 million flowers. So that way they can make this 1 pound of honey. And they do that with every single one of those 50 to 60,000 bees having a distinct task. There's 3 different types of bees. If you eliminated any one of those 3 types of bees, nothing would happen. There would be absolutely no honey made. The whole hive would die. They need all of them. And that is such a powerful picture of the body of Christ. You know, we study that from 1 Corinthians 12, and all of us on this podcast, we can probably count to about 83 sermons and messages that we either taught or heard on the body of Christ. But it's so interesting that verse 22 says that the weaker gifts are indispensable. And so what that means is that the stronger, more popular gifts are essentially worth nothing without the weaker gifts. And And so when I think about a honeybee hive, when you look at that, everybody thinks about, oh, the queen, that the queen is the one who's kind of leading the deal, and there's all this kind of stuff going on. And then you have the worker bees that they have their jobs. And then you have the drones, right? The drones. I mean, it's like they're kind of just taking up a whole lot of space, and yeah, they have a job to get the queen ready to lay her eggs, and other than that, they just kind of lay around. But it's like all of them have these distinct tasks, and you eliminate any of them and it just doesn't work. And it's like that in our student ministries, in the different youth groups that we lead. But we're so wired to think like the culture thinks that we end up snatching up those few. And oftentimes we think about forming a leadership team. Leadership teams can be okay if they're led with the right beginning and the right process. But most of us short circuit that, eliminate the process, and just picked whoever seems to be the best and the brightest and is really good at stuff, or ones that if they're leading, then a whole bunch of other youth are going to follow and fill the seats. No, it's like the exact antithesis of what's in Scripture. And I actually talk about that in the book in the one section. It's right? Like we're worshiping at the idols of leadership and excellence, both of which are incredible things that God can take and frame our thinking to honor him incredibly. But if they're taken without a framework of trying to honor God, and instead we just do things in the name of God with leadership and excellence as our driver, we can miss God incredibly. I know we got to watch our time here, but there's a time I got off a plane and was driven in a van a couple hours, and I was in a country, I won't name the country, but we got out of the van as a group of us, and they had a whole parade lined up, which is not unusual for this culture. They celebrate any guests that were coming to be with them. Now, we were invited by a strong Christian group, and we were there for Christian purposes and everything, but we got out of this van, and we literally had a half-mile or longer parade to get to this celebration that they had set up for us. And the whole town had lined the streets to cheer as we were walking along. As we're walking along, there was a band playing in front of us. And then there's this guy dressed as a witch doctor. And he had like this huge costume on that, it's hard to explain. And he is dancing and jumping around. And I said to the guy who was kind of, the guy that invited us, I'm like, what is up with this guy? And he said, yeah, it's like this act to scare away demons that has been something that was done in this town for hundreds of years. And even though Christ was introduced to the town, this practice still exists. Now I bring this up in the midst of this honeybee discussion because every single culture on the planet has a witch doctor that is dancing around in our churches. Every single one does. It's just a matter if we can name it and are willing to do something about it. The essence of us as Americans is that we worship freedom, and I love our country. I do. I love our country. Salute the flag. Hand on my heart, and I sing the national anthem at sporting events. I don't care if people don't like my singing. I'm singing. I love our country. I do. I love God more. But the essence is that we are swimming in the midst of this freedom thing and this individualistic thing and this consumer thing. And it's just what we're in all the time. So I'm pointing out the witch doctor to us. But it's one thing to point it out. It's another thing to say, what are we going to do about it?
If you join us, you'll be able to jump in and see the second half, because I think we set some really good distinctions that, one, curriculum's not a bad thing. We knew that already, but we also knew it can be a helpful thing. It just isn't the main thing. And when we're looking at problems in our ministry, so often we struggle to look at, well, if I just get the new program, if I just get the new curriculum. And the key is absolutely find excellent resources. We offer a lot of those, but at the end of the day, that's a different thing than building a strategy that moves students from consuming like spiritual hippos to being doers of the gospel like spiritual honeybees. And so that's a big simplification of what we've been talking about. But what I want to do is invite you to jump behind the wall with us. We're going to talk about building that framework. What does it look like to choose that strategy and to lean on something that is more than just the next thing you can purchase or buy or try? So listen, if you're joining us, join us behind the wall if you're a member. If you're not, click below. We're going to have a couple of links, one of which, or two of which will be to Dave's books. And then we actually want to send you to our partnership page for Shaping Student Ministry and our friends at Christian Endeavor that explains who we are in our partnership, because we want to offer you some discounts if you want to join. And just know that we are both complementing one another, and our heart is for the kingdom and to see student ministry thrive. So we'll see you guys behind the wall.